You're listening to Margins and Meaning with John Wilson. Margins and Meaning accept zero responsibility for remakes, delaminations, fractures, open contact, poor scans, missing opposing, unindexed bytes, or any case that miraculously hits your inbox without a requested shade. Anything I say on this show is just my opinion. It's not gospel. It's not CE. It's not legal advice, and it definitely may induce emotional damage. Please, if you choose to listen to anything that was discussed here today, you do so at your own risk, preferably with a full night's sleep, sharp burrs, and a clinician who actually realized there is, in fact, more shades in the shade guide than just A2. Listen at your own risk. Thank you. Welcome back to Margins and Meaning. This is episode 4, and I'm your host, John Wilson. We left off at episode 3 where I was at a new crossroad. I was at the point where I was actually considering the possibility of bringing in some staff. You see, I was struggling with this dysfunctional job, and while I had made some marginal improvements in my life, I was still working a tremendous amount of hours, and I was looking for ways that I could expense those hours in a better manner. So I can remember my first hire very vividly because it was the brother of my best friend's girlfriend. He had come by the lab a couple times, and he had experienced looking over my shoulder and seeing some of the things that I was doing, and he seemed kind of interested. So I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, you want to come in part-time and mimic what I have to do here? And I can show you some skills that you could be helpful for me." And he was reluctant at first, but eventually he said, "Yeah, let's give it a try." So he comes on in, and I can tell you, I remember that first day really, really succinctly because, I realized, in that moment, it wasn't just bringing in staff. I would have to expense so much more time. That investment in this kid would hopefully pay dividends, right? That's the whole reason why we do these things. So what I didn't understand was just how much effort it actually takes to train somebody. And it was an expense of time and energy that I wasn't sure I could even afford, but I went with it. I thought it was time. I had to find a way to make this happen. So I told him, "Hey, just come on in and watch what I do and try to mimic what I do here, and we'll see how it goes." But what I didn't consider is how unteachable second nature feels. To me, taking a couple models, sticking them together, and slapping some plaster on an articulator seems like a no-brainer. It really is automatic to me. So when I saw him try for the first time after watching my quick little experiment to show him how to do something, it was quickly very obvious that it wasn't going to be this easy. It was like watching somebody trying to dance to a song they've never listened to. It was so awkward and unintuitive. He was holding the dang plaster knife like a prison shank. It wasn't something that looked like he had any business doing what he was doing. And then I tried to remember, well, what was my first day like? It's hard to really remember those feelings. So in my youth and silliness, I started to mock him a little bit. I thought levity would be the thing that was going to loosen him up and we would be fine with it, but it really backfired. He really closed off and felt uncomfortable. I could see it, and I recognized that I made a huge mistake. And I swallowed hard and I said, "Okay, let's just try this again." And this time I did it something completely different. I took the time and I slowed down. I took the models, I pointed out some certain landmarks. I didn't talk in any type of dental jargon. It was completely simple. I showed him how the ratio of plaster to water would affect the setting. I showed him how the timing of it all was the real gift of it. And then I looked at him closely after I watched him try it a second time, and I said, "Look what you just did. And he was all awkward and uncomfortable, getting defensive like he screwed something up. I said, hey, listen, you improved. And while that second attempt was super awkward, there was improvement. And to me, when I saw that little smile come on his face after I gave him a few words of encouragement, even though he didn't want me to really see that smile, I knew that that was a better path. Because in that first day with a new person in my little personal space, in that little laboratory, it was so different. You see, I didn't save a single minute of time, but I learned a lesson that I've carried over my entire career. You see, I believe that if you're teaching from a place of superiority, it will never be effective. You got to meet your students where they are and speak to them in a way that encourages the effort that they have to put out to learn, rather than instilling fear and consequence. I think that's how learning is done most effectively. But the truth is that day I was far more the student than he was. And what was really powerful and what I really took away from that moment was that I really actually had a teachable set of skills to pass on. The weeks went on, this kid improved slowly. He took pride in not wanting to make mistakes, but the mistakes that matter were never the technical ones. You see, he would casually stroll in an hour late, not really thinking once that it was a problem. He never really valued the institution of the job like I had. And it bothered me. It frustrated me. And in that small, tight, personal space, we're nearly on top of one another in this little laboratory, my frustrations grew. But then I realized something rather essential, and it really has helped me as I've moved through my career. You see, nobody was going to be in that furnace for the same reason I was. No one would be as stubborn or as focused or as committed to the time management that it takes to survive in this trade. And there certainly is not going to be many in my career that would stay without the right motivation. So after about 6 months to a year of that part-time helper in my laboratory, I picked up on a few things. But eventually he moved on to something different outside of dentistry. We left on great terms. I still have a relationship with him. And I will forever be grateful for the opportunity and the memories that we created together in that space. But I needed to move on. I needed to find the next person that could save me some time, and I was going to do it in a slightly different manner this time. I thought it would be, rather intuitive for me to make a different path, to maybe pick somebody that had a little experience, that could really not need to have as much hand-holding, and it could eventually save me the time that I was actually trying to capture. So this older tech, he'd been a bench tech forever, very accomplished denture technician, very quick at what he did. He had a full-time job, and he was looking to moonlight. And it wasn't my perfect solution, but in the time, it was going to save me some time. So I agreed to it. We were going to set it up where he's going to stop by after work. He's going to pick up some pans. He'd take them home. He'd work in the evenings at his house, and he'd drop them off in the morning on his way into work. And I thought this was going to be a really slick solution. You see, all the little tiny things that just rob you of time, these preliminary steps that, while super important, were not really taking the skill level that I'd like to be able to expense to more difficult things. So if I could pitch that to somebody that could step in and take care of those for me, I would be all the better. I'd capture some time. But I didn't see the truth at first. You see, he wasn't coming to help me grow. He wasn't coming to elevate what I was building. He was coming to put a few bucks in his pocket. And hey, there's nothing wrong with a man just trying to earn a little bit more. I respect it. But the sting came when I realized he had no investment in who I was, where I was going, or what I was trying to build. The disappointment wasn't him. The disappointment was me. He realized that I was really looking for a shortcut to exist, and there just didn't seem to be one at that time. You see, looking back now, I can admit it plainly. I was short-sighted. I was tired. I was stretched so thin. I was desperate for relief, but I wanted to believe there was an easy road. Something that just finally would show up at my door and would make this path a little less rocky. But instead, the cases started coming back that they just didn't feel right. Nothing was really technically wrong with them, but everything was just off a little bit. I felt like the work that he was doing was being done without any soul, right? And it bothered me more than anything else because the clients weren't hiring some moonlighter. They were hiring me. It was my name, my promise, my reputation that was on the line here. And seeing work that left the bench that didn't feel like mine was kind of a heartbreak. I did not like it. And that's when it really clicked. Quality isn't a skill, it's a value. And you can't teach values to someone that doesn't have them already. This chapter forced me to confront something uncomfortable. I was still thinking like that one-man shop, trying to survive instead of the business owner building something intentional. I was trying to hire a solution instead of confronting the systems I didn't have. Those expectations I never set, and the leadership that I hadn't learned yet. You see, this moonlighter didn't fail me. He revealed parts of myself that I needed to grow. So how was I going to get over this frustration? How was I going to move to the next step? I can tell you, there's a moment as a technician, a very real physical moment where you pick up a case and you know instantly that it lacks intent. Not that it's just blatantly bad or wrong. It's just not yours. It's like hearing a song that is played by two different musicians. One has heart, one doesn't. Which one do you want to listen to? And the more I held those trays with sharp borders or, over-contoured lower base plates, it really made me upset because I realized how dangerous it is to outsource your standards. You see, I was outsourcing labor, or at least I thought I was, but somehow I was starting to realize that I was compromising on my own standards. And that was not something that I was willing to do. I took that back into perspective because when I realized that you can hire hands, but it's so much harder to hire heart, it forced me to think things in a different manner. You see, I had to begin this deeper, harder chapter. It's all part of, the growth process of this story that I'm sharing with you. I stopped blaming the circumstances and started looking in the mirror. I had to confront a few really hard things that I didn't like. I was looking for this easy button. I was looking for anything that I could do to make my life easier. I had my own set of expectations, but I certainly didn't have them mapped out. It just felt right. I don't know why, but at the time I just thought skill alone would make someone, the right fit. I was uncomfortable speaking up when something wasn't right. I didn't know how to address this without having confrontation. I didn't want to lose this helper, but I knew something was wrong. Why was I still thinking like this one-man shop trying just to stay alive, rather instead of like the business owner trying to build something intentional? Why? That internal shift, ugly as it was, became the foundation for the leader I would eventually become. Because eventually that realization hit me square in the chest. You certainly cannot hire someone to fix a problem you're unwilling to confront in yourself. This was the season where I finally stopped chasing help and started creating systems. Where I stopped asking, who can do this for me, and started asking, how do I teach someone to do it the right way? This was the birthplace of my standards. This is where the seeds of mentorship first really appeared. And this is where the business stopped just being accidental. I started putting a map together, a plan to what I wanted to say was the promised land. A time that would make my life easier, but I can tell you it was a hard and rocky road. So now I had hired and lost my first trained in-house technician. The moonlighter hadn't worked out, and I was forced to sever ties with him as well. 2 hires in, 2 departures behind me, and suddenly the weight of it all was back on my shoulders. My mind and perception were becoming jaded by these outcomes. And literally, I created all of this on myself. The first time I started to truly reflect, I started thinking, hey, how do I begin to chronicle what really matters to me? How do I verbalize my intentions with new staff? How do I map out a road that keeps us from getting lost, but without eliminating the creativity and growth? These questions felt like the real answers I'd been searching for. If I was going to learn to lead, I needed to learn to communicate more effectively. I wasn't great at this. It seemed like I was always being the most creative when things would get to the boiling point and I would explode. And that's not a way that can actually really be absorbed in communication. It's difficult. That just instills fear, and that's not the person I wanted to be. You see, I finally realized that my so-called long philosophy of it's either right or it's wrong was completely ambiguous to others. I needed something tangible. I needed a set of goals. I needed a path forward, something the employees could embrace rather than fear. I believe systems became that path. They really did save me. They allowed growth. They pulled me out of the chaos of reaction and into the clarity of intention. In those years, developing task-based systems was troublesome. I started noticing something fundamental, really. While every technician's goal was similarly the same, right? To reach the final product. What was really interesting and obvious to me after I started taking CE was the path to get to that finish line. They varied so wildly, completely different. And honestly, that was some of the things that I really loved the most about attending those classes was watching some other technicians doing the same things that I would do, but getting to the end result in a different manner. It was fascinating. It opened my eyes to new efficiencies, new ideas, and new approaches. But if you're going to lead with a system-based model, you must be the one who outlines the path. And that's when the pushback really began. We slowly kept bringing in people. We struggled to maintain enough cash flow to make payroll. There were days I worried the check wouldn't post before the employees would get down there and cash theirs. These struggles refined my understanding of how systems would eventually change everything about my perspective. For years, I had been so rigid in my beliefs, rigid in continuing something because, well, it worked, rather than exploring the possibilities of reinventing something better. But when I finally allowed myself to be more adaptive, things began to improve. Instead of looking over the shoulders of my techs, having my thumb on the back of their neck, I began to encourage them. I started saying, hey, this framework is your path. But every path holds opportunities to see something new, something beautiful, something worth exploring. As long as we arrived at our known destination, I encourage the experimentation. I encourage creativity. I encourage the unique fingerprint every technician brings to the craft. And I encouraged owning what you produce. This way of leading, firm in direction but flexible in the expression, became the best method I've found to keep technicians accountable, engaged, and invested in the pursuit of excellence. So in retrospect, that truth is that none of this, those hires, the failures that I was having, the moonlighter, that panic that I had for payroll, those frustrations, those long nights wondering what the hell I was still doing there, was ever really about those people. I reflected back and recognized it was about me. It was about me being forced to see myself clearly for the first time in my life. And not looking at the version I thought I was projecting, but the real version. The version who was still learning, still raw, still stumbling forward, trying to build something out of sheer will. You see, leadership didn't show up the day I opened the lab, guys. It didn't show up the day I hired my first tech. I think leadership showed up in the quiet moments. The one where the room feels too small and too loud at the same time, when I finally had to admit something. I just can't keep doing this alone. I can't keep pretending I know how to lead just because I know how to do the craft. It was built into the reflection that I tried to avoid, guys. It was built into the conversations I should have had sooner with myself. It was built into the mistakes that stung harder than I ever wanted to admit out loud. You see, I learned systems don't matter unless they serve people. I learned that communication isn't barking orders, it's creating clarity where there used to be so much confusion. I learned that accountability isn't something you demand, it's something you model. And I learned that if I wanted people to care about the work in the same way I cared about the work, I needed to create a path that meant something. A path with purpose, a path with direction, a path that didn't suffocate their creativity, but really gave them room to breathe. Because we all know the destination's not going to change, but excellence is always going to be our goal, but the journey, guys. That's the way we lift each other up, teach each other, challenge each other. That's where the meaning is. That's where the growth is. That's where the real craft actually is. And that's when I understood something I wish I had known from day one. Leadership isn't built in the furnace. It's built in the reflection you finally learn to stop running from. Thank you.